the people of Georgia are going to elect Brian Kemp.
I blow up government spending.
There's actually no record of her whatsoever voting in any election. It's horrible.
I gotta show this to you.
The Republican officials, they have begun a process of removing voters who they claim may have voted in 2 states.
So the fact that our Secretary of State is undertaking to purge 500,000 voters should be deeply concerning.
The card simply says that you may be registered in state A and state B.
I never received a postcard. I won't be able to vote for the November 6th election.
What's this postcard business? That's the key.
Sir, why do we have to sue you to get the names of voters who've been removed? Are you removing black voters from the voter rolls just so you can win this election?
You put Stacy in there, and you're going to have Georgia turn into Venezuela.
Stacy.
We're not going to let them steal this election. We're going to stand up for what's right here.
I will vote.
She has civil rights meetings at her home, and today to come out and not be able to vote bothers me. It bothers me to my core.
Welcome, everyone, to what I know is going to be an exciting and historic live broadcast. How Trump Stole 2020, published today, is the result of 20 years of investigations, and it tells a story that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. As Greg Palast, editor and publisher at 7 Stories Press, I want to thank Greg for what he gets up and does to put this story in front of people every single day. And I want to thank Noam and Amy for what they do every day and for taking the time and insisting on the importance of Greg's work and this topic, which is connected so viscerally to everything we're fighting for in 2020. I also want to thank the many people who worked on this event and this book launch, Ruth and Allison from 7 Stories, Amy's producer, Dennis, Valeria Chomsky, Lenny, Nicole, Carrie, Anne, John from Greg's organization, and our participating independent booksellers, Book Passage from Santa Cruz, Third Place Books in Seattle, and Word Up in Washington Heights and New York City. I also want to thank Jacobin Magazine and Project Censored for co-sponsoring this event with us. And a special shout out to Ted Rall, political commentator and illustrator, artist who created the brilliant 48-page comic book that is the book's centerfold. Amy Goodman does as much to ensure that there's a fourth estate in America as anyone alive. She's the host and executive producer of Democracy Now!, a national, daily, independent, award-winning news program airing on over 1,400 public television and radio stations worldwide. Amy's the recipient of many awards of international reporting for clarity in public language and for creative citizenship, including a Neiman Foundation honor, the I.F. Stone Medal for Journalistic Independence Lifetime Achievement Award, and she was the first journalist to win the Right Livelihood Award. She's written or co-written 6 best-selling books, the latest of which is Democracy Now!, 20 years covering the movements changing America. Amy.
Thank you so much, Dan, and what an honor it is to be here today with you, with Greg Palast, and with Noam Chomsky for this, what I look forward to very much, this discussion. Well, beloved around the world for the strength of his personal commitment to the truth and for the brilliance of his ideas, Noam Chomsky is an American linguist, an activist, a political philosopher. A professor of linguistics and philosophy at MIT for more than half a century, he's currently a professor at the University of Arizona, Tucson. Among his many change-making books is Requiem for the American Dream, which has taken on new significance, to say the least, in the present moment, and has been cited by students as opening their eyes to inequality. It has also been made into a popular film. And then there is, well, none other than, well, let's say Secretary of State for Florida, Katherine Harris, once called Greg Palast twisted, and maniacal. She's the one who certified the election of George Bush over Al Gore. But The Guardian called Greg the most important investigative reporter of our time. For The Guardian, BBC Television, Rolling Stone, and our own Democracy Now! NewsHour, Greg Palast, with his signature fedora, has been hunting down racist vote trickery for 20 years, beginning with his busting the Bush family's theft of Florida in 2000. Esquire magazine wrote, Greg Palast is one of those inconveniently stubborn journalists who gets his teeth into a story and shakes it bloody right there in the middle of the parlor, dreadfully inconveniencing the pampered swells of the elite political press. Greg Palast is unique among investigative reporters because he was a real-life investigator and detective for the U.S. Justice Department and others, directing billion-dollar racketeering cases. He knows his stuff. He was a protege of Milton Friedman at the University of Chicago, lectured at Cambridge, Oxford, and Harvard, authored 4 New York Times best-selling books, including The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. Greg Palast is a Puffin Foundation Fellow. His work is followed worldwide. Just last year, the Mexican Association of Journalists named Greg Palast their International Reporter of the Year. Today, Greg Palast has released his latest book, already climbing to the top of the bestseller list, How Trump Stole 2020, The Hunt for America's Vanished Voters. And here's Greg Palast with a few words of warning from the opening of his book, How Trump Stole 2020.
Wow, thank you, Amy, very much for that. And so, okay, chapter 2 is America, You Are Not Guilty. So I'm going to read you one page. America, let's talk. I get it. You're stunned you elected an orange-stained, gelatinous bag of malicious mendacity, a snorting porcine pile, pustule of bloviating bigot, hinged to grasping little griplets, a bloated ball of gracelessness and crybaby petulance as President of the United States. America, you can stop hiding your face now. You're not guilty. Trump didn't win in 2016, and I'm not talking about Trump losing the popular vote. Trump lost the Electoral College. That is, he lost, if you count all the votes, he burgled, jacked, swiped, shoplifted, purloined, filched, fiddled, and snatched from citizens not of a whitish orange hue. And unless we wise up, 2020 will be deja vu all over again. We're here to wise up. Thank you, Amy.
And thank you, Greg. This is the book, How Trump Stole 2020. And we're going to begin with the first question to Noam Chomsky. Noam, can you talk about Greg's book?
First of all, it's a really great and eye-opening and illuminating book. Everyone should read it carefully. Like even the greatest work, it has flaws. One of the flaws is it's quite unfair to the Republican Party and to the Clinton Democrats. It fails to recognize that they are minority parties. They recognize it. Trump said it about the Republicans. He said, there's a fair election, you'll never get a Republican voted. But one of the most powerful chapters in the book is about the California Democrats, who, according to Greg's analysis, stole more votes than the Republicans probably put together. But they're a minority party. There was no other way to keep Sanders out. There's no other way for the Republicans to keep a Democrat out. So you have to be fair. They just have no other means. And furthermore, they're acting on principle. The principle actually has constitutional roots. It has roots in what's called progressive democratic theory. It has roots in Econ 101. It's a principle that says if you don't keep the rich happy, you're in trouble. And there's plenty of evidence for that. So take, say, Allende's Chile. You don't keep the rich happy, money flows out of the country, nobody invests, international investors don't give you a cent, Then comes efforts to overthrow the government. You just got to keep the rich happy. And the Republicans, who are totally dedicated to the welfare of the ultra-rich and the corporate sector, understand that. They're also what are called originalists. They go back, they're very much concerned with our Constitution, what the framers thought. They probably don't know this because they don't bother reading. But if they did bother reading, they would find that the Constitution is founded on the principle that it's necessary to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. James Madison, the main framer, Alexander Hamilton, other major framer, we have to protect the rich against the depredations that the democratic spirit might lead people who don't own property to act against property. There's more to say about this if this time will go on, but if you accept the principle that guides the Republican Party and the California Democrats, that it's very important to serve the master, the very rich, the corporate sector, you have to keep them in place, then it's very important to do what's called democratic theory tells you to do, liberal democratic theory. You have to marginalize the public. The public are ignorant and meddlesome outsiders. They're stupid and ignorant. They don't understand. Their job is to be spectators, not participants. Maybe they push a lever now and then, but then they're supposed to go home. That's people like Walter Lippmann, the leading liberal public intellectual of the 20th century, Reinhold Niebuhr. We have to feed the stupid public with necessary illusions, emotionally potent simplifications, and if we can't do that, just take away their votes. So there's a kind of a rationale behind it. Have to be fair. If we're going to serve the masters abjectly, then what can you do? You're a minority. You have to carry out something like the framers' coup against democracy. And what Greg has shown is they're doing it very successfully, just by stealing the votes of the wrong people. So we could look at it that way and say that a very serious flaw in the study.
I wanted to ask Greg, because unlike Noam, a lot of people haven't yet read the book. It's just coming out. And Greg, I wanted to ask you about the origins of the book, why you chose to write it, and then explain, how did Trump steal 2020?
I was going to do another book, and then I saw that this was happening. Now, understand, it's called How Trump Stole 2020. The reason I wrote the book is that it's not a prediction, Amy. I don't have crystal balls here. It's a fact. He already stole it. And that's why the first chapter is simply the election. Donald Trump won re-election in November 2018, 2 years before any vote was taken, 2 years ago. What happened was, and you saw in the little film that we opened up with in Georgia, that's where they took the new vote thieving technique for a test drive. In 2018, the Supreme Court allowed GOP secretaries of state vote operatives like Brian Kemp and the little Catherine Harrises that are running our election system, and said that they could begin purging voters with a new system. Brian Kemp took it for a test drive, removed 500,000 voters in Georgia. And in fact, you carried my report. I mean, it was carried on Democracy Now! When I did jump Brian Kemp, ask him if he was removing voters of color, young voters, to steal the election. I had to sue him. I won a federal court case, got the records, and found that he had illegally removed 340,134 voters. Let me repeat that, 340,000. We weren't sampling, went through name by name by name, and determined, they said these people had moved away. They hadn't left Georgia. They were still there. We could prove it. In fact, I went to the polling station, and this is what really kind of forced it.
Right here. It was since 1968.
You saw that woman in tears and her aunt, 92 years old. This is Martin Luther King's cousin, voting for the 50th year in the same schoolhouse in Atlanta. They threw her out. The 50th year since her cousin, 50 years since her cousin was murdered. She was cousin of Martin Luther King. He used to come over to her house, and after he sermonized at the Ebenezer Baptist Church, he would have his Sunday dinner there. They threw her out. And then what I found out is that once Brian Kemp became governor, he beat Stacy Abrams, and even she said, citing my 340,000 illegal removals, she said, I won, but I won't be inaugurated. But it's not a Georgia story. That people didn't understand. That was the test run for the national rollout of this massive purge. Are you ready? Write this number down. 16.7 million people have been removed from the voter rolls in the past 2 years. By the way, that's not from my black helicopter, Amy. That's from the United States Elections Assistance Commission. 16.7 million voters, 1 in 12. If you think you're going to mail in your ballot, not if you're purged and you don't know it, you can't mail in your ballot if you don't get it. And they're not going to send that to you if you're purged. And it is overwhelmingly voters of color and young people. And I was just in, and then I went to Milwaukee, and where I found, and you'll see, we'll bring up some of that tape later, but where they're saying 150,000 people have moved, left the state or left their home county. They haven't gone anywhere. For example, I had Sequana Taylor. They said it left Milwaukee. And I asked Sequana, did you leave Milwaukee? You know, you shouldn't be voting in Milwaukee if you left Milwaukee. She says, I don't think I've left Milwaukee, Mr. Palast. I'm the county supervisor of Milwaukee.
No, I moved 2 stoplights down from the house that I stayed in. So, like, you can kind of say within walking distance.
But she is an African-American woman, so she's definitely guilty of voting while black. So I see this all around the country. Votes not being counted, being deep sixed, people being thrown, 1 million provisional ballots were thrown out. It's all the new Jim Crow. It is a Jim Crow operation, and unless we can blow the whistle on it, we can't reverse it. So the point of how Trump stole 2020, the reason I wrote it is that he did steal it, but we can steal it back. That is, we can bust the burglary and reverse it. We can. And that's why I wrote the book.
So how do you reverse it?
Okay, so there's a bunch of things. Well, first of all, at the back of the book, you know, it's probably the most important thing is here at the back. I don't know if you can see it, but it is Greg and Ted's new improved ballot condom to protect your vote, for safe voting. And no, Amy, you don't put the ballot condom, rip it out and put it around the ballot. It shows you how to save your vote. Number one, if you've been purged, you don't know it. I looked my name up, Greg Palast, and it said here in California, no such voter. That was me too. So King's cousin, Sequana Taylor, they didn't know that they were purged, and they show up to vote and they lose it. So now everyone watching this, please check your registration right now. Go online to your Secretary of State, your Board of Elections, check your registration. If you ain't there, re-register online on the spot, make a screenshot of that. That's just the beginning. And then we have to make sure, especially with mail-in balloting. Amy, we can get it further into that, but 22% of all mail-in ballots, 22%, that's 1 out of 5, according to MIT, Caltech studies, don't get counted. How do we make sure that our votes, especially if we go from just 20 million people voting by mail, 40 million people voting by mail, to 80 million people voting by mail, how do we prevent millions of votes not being counted? So
what do you mean you don't count it?
Well, literally, okay? First of all, you can't mail in your ballot if it's not mailed out to you. And according to MIT, about 1 in 10 mail-in ballots, it's crazy, never get to the voter. 1 in 10. And I can tell you, I spoke to to Andrea Young. She's the executive director of Aclu of Georgia. She put in for her vote for her and her husband 45 days before the Georgia primary. June 9th primary, her husband, this is the head of the ACLU, got his ballot on June 10. So he ended up waiting in line with all his other voters. When you saw those lines, Amy, in Georgia, it wasn't because black folk like to sit in humid rain for 4 hours to vote. They did ask for their ballots. Almost everyone we spoke to said the same thing. I asked for a ballot. I never got it. 1 in 10 people ask for it, don't get it. And on top of that, another 1 in 10 or 1 in 9, you mail in your ballot, they don't count it. They don't count it. I mean, this is the secret of American democracy, the nasty little secret, Amy. We don't count all the votes. we don't count all the votes. So they come up with cockamamie reasons to throw out your ballot. And I got to tell you, it can happen to anyone. My sister's a lawyer, lost her mail-in vote in California because she didn't properly fill in the bubble. Don't put an X, don't put a check mark, don't put a smiley face, as it says in the ballot condom. If it says fill in the bubble, fill in the bubble. Put in the right postage. You know, 100,000 people lost their right to vote because of because of postage due. Now, Amy, if it's anyone losing their votes, then it's random. Who cares? Doesn't change the election. It's not random. We disqualified 1.9 million in-precinct votes in 2016, not anyone's vote. According to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, if you're black, the chance your vote will be disqualified is 900% higher. This is in the book. 900% higher if you're white than if you're black. 500% higher if you're Hispanic than if you're white. So wait, let me get that right. 900% higher, more likely that you will have your vote disqualified if you're black than if you're white. 500% more likely to have your vote disqualified if you're Hispanic than if you're white. And if you're Native American, I can tell you as a former statistician, as professor of statistics, it's almost uncountable how terrible the non-count of American Native votes is. And those are in swing states like Arizona and New Mexico. I had precincts in New Mexico for Native Americans where there was not one vote for president. Do you think that American natives don't, and the indigenous people and the Pueblo population of New Mexico don't want to pick their president? This is what's happening in America.
What is happening there?
So what we're having is, and in the book I have a very exacting breakdown. In 16, according to the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, we lost 5.8 million votes altogether, thrown out. 3 million mail-in ballots were disqualified. 2 million in-precinct ballots were disqualified. So you had 5 million ballots chucked out. Then you had a couple million voters blocked from voting. You know, they don't like your ID. They also threw out 1 million provisional ballots, as I've said. Those are the ballots. And again, it's not random. It's not random, Amy. As you find in the book, you meet the people that get thrown out, that get provisional ballots, like Raheem Shabazz in the guy you saw in the little film in Atlanta. Okay, he moved down the street. You don't have to re-register if you move within your neighborhood. But they took away his vote because they knew what neighborhood he moved into. And so they said you can get a provisional ballot. But here's the problem. Federal law requires that if your name's missing from the voter rolls, they have to give you a provisional ballot. Georgia rules, which were set by Brian Kemp, and remember, he's the candidate. The candidate says, but those ballots can't be counted. So you have the right to the ballot, but they don't get counted. 935,000 provisional ballots were not counted in 16. It's going to be worse this year. And I got to tell you again, everything is down to race. And that's what my fellow reporters are not covering. It's race. If you are Hispanic, you're 300% more likely to get a provisional ballot. 250% more likely if you're black than if you're white to get a provisional ballot. And again, they reject almost 1 million of them. That's what's happening in America. It's apartheid elections, but it's very, very sophisticated. But we have ways of undoing the Jim Crow operation.
You have a chapter, Eric Crow, Jim Crow's liberal twin. What do you mean?
The Pew Trust decided, they're going to help the poor little low-income voters, help them vote. Good liberals. So they came up with lists, which they handed out to states, saying, here are people who've moved into your states. You know what the GOP did? They said, thank you very much. This is a mover list. And the state of Wisconsin passed a law saying anyone on the Pew Charity mover list has to be removed from the voter rolls. So the nice Pew Trust, the liberals, ended up providing hit lists to 27 states. And at least a dozen of them are removing voters that they say have moved because they got their names from the Pew Trust. Well, I had a team of experts. You'll see in the book, I had a team of experts going over the list to see if people really moved. And by the way, it's easy to find out if you've really moved. There's experts in this field. They work for Amazon. They work for eBay. We got the Amazon, eBay experts. I hired them to say, okay, you guys know exactly where people live. They use 200 databases. Amazon knows where you were last Thursday at 2 p.m., by the way. I hate to break this news to you. So we asked them, can you go through the purge list and tell us where these voters are. And they said, this purge list is 74% wrong. They gave me every single name and address of wrongly removed voters in Atlanta and throughout Georgia and throughout Wisconsin. But again, some of these lists are provided of all places by the Pew Charitable Trust. So when liberals try to improve things, like liberals came up with the Help America Vote Act and the provisional ballot, but they got the right to the ballot. They didn't get the right to get it counted. Now they come up with a list of people who are moving. The idea is to send them postcards, say, would you like to register to vote? And they use it as a hit list. This is the ugly stuff that's going. That's where Saquana Taylor, the supervisor in Milwaukee, she was on that list, on the Pew Charitable Trust list, saying that she had left Milwaukee. I don't think so.
Tonight, we're bringing in a special guest, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, Latasha Brown of Atlanta. Latasha is also founder of Southern Black Girls and Women's Consortium. She's an American Democracy Fellow at Harvard University and a stunning gospel singer who will soon release her album of songs that move the movement. Greg Palast spoke with Latasha Brown yesterday.
So Latasha Brown, what is Black Voters Matter?
So Black Voters Matter is a power building organization. It was co-founded by myself and Cliff Albright in 2016. We wanted to create an organization that actually helped to build capacity of Black-led grassroots groups on the ground to really be able to build power, and not just around elections, but around issues and those things that are important in our community and advancing our community and policy and issues in our community.
Okay. And by the way, you're in Atlanta, right? Are you in Atlanta right now?
I am. I'm in Atlanta. I'm based in Atlanta. I'm a native of Alabama, but I'm based in Atlanta. And we're working, Black Voters Matter is working in 11 states across the country very deeply, but we also work in certain cities. For example, we're working in St. Louis. We're doing some work in Minneapolis. We're working in Houston, but we work very deeply on a statewide level in 11 states around the country.
Wow. Okay. Well, I don't know if you got a chance to look at the book. Noam Chomsky says it's scary. What do you think?
Absolutely. I think one of the things I think that you are great as an investigative journalist around is putting the hard, raw truth out there. And it's just the truth. It is, I think it reminds me of a couple of things. One, it reminds me of just the fragility of democracy. That, we really got to recognize that democracy, we think about democracy as, it'll work itself out. The same way we think about the stock market, right? That the market will take care of itself. That's not true, right? And so I think it's really important. I think it's, one, is exposing the fragility of democracy. Two, I think that we've got to be able to recognize we're in the midst of, we're in pre-fascism stage. Right. And I think some of the things that you raised around Trump and his approach and how he has not been held accountable, those things are extremely scary.
Well, thank you for that. Now, you've been working, I understand, with the ACLU of Georgia. Tell me about that, the Black Voters Matter.
So one of the things that we've been doing and working with the ACLU is we actually filed a lawsuit. We filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia around the postage stamps, not being able to provide the postage stamps for voters. We see that as a poll tax, that anything that creates an additional expense for people to have to vote, which should not be the case in America, right? That becomes a poll tax. And so particularly in the midst of a pandemic, thinking through people have to go get stamps, the cost of a stamp, particularly when there have been resources set aside. So we've been working with ACLU on a number of issues, but one in particular, we filed a lawsuit against the state of Georgia around making sure that the state provides the postage stamps for voters who are sending in their mail-in ballots.
Okay. Well, on mail-in balloting, we have to mail in our votes or we die, right? It's mail in or die. But I'm very concerned that about the dangers of mail-in, that there are pitfalls in mail-in ballots, such as some alligators in that mailbox, and Jim Crow may be in that mailbox. Barbara Arnwine, the great voting rights attorney, has said that mail-in voting in the African-American community could be a disaster, that there are particular problems and impediments that people like Brian Kemp of Georgia have put in your way for mail-in voting. What are the particular problems besides postage that minority voters face with mail-in voting? We had some in the book.
You know, I think that there's two things that I do think we have to be mindful of is we have to be mindful of not giving people a false choice that you either can vote or you got to die. That is just a false choice. And what's supposed to be a democracy should provide to make sure that we're providing safe, efficient, and effective access to the ballot. We know that that's not happening, right? We do know, just as you've uncovered, that one of the challenges and one of the ways that elections are stolen, right, is through these different processes. But I think that does, nevertheless, we've got to continue to push and press that there's multiple ways that we're looking at this election cycle, and then multiple ways that people can cast their ballots, free and fair access, and that there's some oversight around this issue as well. And that's part of the problem. There's nobody ever held accountable. And so some of the ways that we've seen as some of the things that you've uncovered around people, the way that we've been using, throwing out the ballots around folks' names, that having particular kind of names that are part of an algorithm that has an ethnic root. I think that's been one framework. Another one is getting on election day. What I experienced for myself during the primary, where I literally out in line for hours waiting because we were told that the machines themselves, the machines that the state of Georgia actually spent over $102 million on brand new machines. For some reason, once again, they forgot to get the cords for them, right? They didn't have enough cords for them. For once again, these machines that they spent $100 million on, that they didn't have the key, which was actually the code. The poll workers didn't have the code. So we keep seeing, here it is, we've got these resources going to these new technologies, but we're seeing the same old problems that we've seen, our community has seen in the past, which we know are all forms of voter suppression.
Yes, in fact, you have a massive wipeout of voters by Brian Kemp and his successor, the Republican governor, who wiped out over 1/3 voters illegally, including Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin. I was at the polling station with her in Atlanta when she was thrown out. This matter of being, if you're thrown off the voter rolls, then you can't get your ballot, right? So that you have all these voters of color and young people in Georgia who simply aren't going to get their ballots because they don't know they've been removed. What do we do about that?
You know, I also want to raise another point that we've been getting as well. Most recently, we actually participated. One of the states that we work in is in Kentucky. And so when we went to Kentucky that morning, there were voters that walked up to us. We actually have a copy of the letter, who had always voted Democrat, that on the day of the election, they get a letter that says they're ineligible of participating in the Democratic primary because, in fact, they had voted Republican. And these voters are saying, I've never registered as a Republican. So why is it? And this is the day of the election, which means, do you have enough time to correct it? Even those that said that they went to one of the men that we actually have a videotape of, he said that when he went to vote and he got this information, he had just received this letter, he went to clear it, the line was around the building. So even in the Kentucky race, when they were saying, oh, it was seamless, yeah, it went seamless to some, but there were still voter suppression issues it's almost like you're skimming off the top, that you're constantly skimming these votes in different ways. There's a spectrum of how voter suppression happens. And so what we've got to do, there's a couple of things. One, we've got to hold people accountable. One of the reasons why I think, Greg, this continues to happen, nobody is ever held accountable. Even in the state of Georgia, that essentially he stole the election and he got a promotion, right? And so even the people that are participating in this, at worst, they may get a headline, right? But they're not being held accountable. We've got to have some strict rules that say when people are tampering, when folks are not, particularly like the Secretary of State, there needs to be a recall. They need to be held accountable for this. And there's some people that got to not only be held accountable in a sense of being put out of office, but there's some people that should face some charges, right, as voter fraud.
Thanks a lot, Latasha.
Thank you.
Noam, why isn't the Democratic Party screaming right now about this? We are just months away from the 2020 election.
Take a look at California. They're participating. There's one qualification to what Greg said about it being a race-based robbery. It's also a class-based robbery, and that's what lies behind it. You don't want the blacks to vote because they vote the wrong way. But you don't want whites to vote if they're going to vote for Bernie Sanders. That's the California story. And as Greg points out, demonstrates in the book, California probably outmatches the whole Republican robbery. So there's deep issues involved. Why the Democrats aren't stealing? They're part of the game. The new Democrats, that is, the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, the moderate Republicans. There actually is a new Democratic Party arising. Sanders is the main figure, but it's basically the activists on the ground who've made a big difference. If you look at the Democratic Party program today, it's been pressed farther to the left than practically any precedent. And not because the DNC had a conversion, but because they're being pressed by people on the ground. People from Sunrise Movement, from other activist groups are just forcing it. And as Greg pointed out, importantly, you can change these things. I quoted before the framers' coup against democracy, but history didn't end then. There was a major popular reaction to it. And over the years, those barriers to democracy were reduced. It wasn't easy. It's very hard work. And Greg points out in the book that it wasn't until the, correct me if I'm wrong, 1850s, 1860s, that you could get Catholics and Jews voting in some states.
Actually, in fact, Noam, we had, I can't remember whether it's Virginia, a couple states didn't allow Catholics to vote until after Black people were allowed to vote under the Constitution. And yeah, exactly. And by the way, American natives are only given citizenship in 1926 and the right to the vote in 1964, a year before the Voting Rights Act.
There's a lot more like this. I mean, federal law required that blacks couldn't enter federally funded housing until the late 1960s. They missed out on the whole period of house purchasing, which is the basis for wealth in the United States. One of the reasons for the shocking legacy of 400 years. But the point is, a lot of these things, as one of the good points, important points in the book, is it can be overcome. It's going to take a struggle. In fact, going back to something else you point out, which I think is very important, you were talking about registration. Why have registration? Other countries don't have it. You pointed out even North Dakota doesn't have it. This is just another technique to prevent the wrong people from voting.
That's right.
Dismantle that. We should dismantle having the voting day on a day when everybody's at work, which automatically cuts out a lot of people. There's a whole complicated system of preventing the wrong people from voting, which is all built on the principle that Madison, in fact, elucidated. You have to protect the minority of the opulent from the majority. Democracy is a very dangerous thing.
Yeah, it's about, as I say in the book, while I talk about race, because it's really about power. And the reason why the wealthy go after African-American voters is that they're politically vulnerable. So for example, back in 2000, when I uncovered that Katherine Harris and Jeb Bush had removed tens of thousands of Black people from the voter rolls, calling them felons who had no right to vote. And I want to tell you something. The New York Times finally picked up the story and said the list was flawed. No, sorry, Times. It was fraud. There wasn't one single illegal voter, but all the voters had BLA next to their name for Black on their registrations. That's what elected George Bush as president. Now, by removing tens of thousands of Black voters, but he supposedly won by 537 votes. But why pick on Black voters? I can tell you, the chairman of the Democratic Party says, I can't get one white Democratic politicians to defend these voters. Because it's very easy to accuse Black people of having felony records, even though it wasn't true at all. So it's a vulnerable group of people that that politicians won't defend, including within the Democratic Party. And that's a huge problem. So you're right, it's about power and class. But in America, the mark of class is race. And that's why I concentrate on race. That's the trick, because you can't get defenders of voters of color. This is what we're missing in America.
Now, you work with Stacey Abrams in Georgia.
Yes.
You sued the governor. You sued Kemp. What happened?
Yes. Well, I myself sued before I worked with Stacey Abrams to get the documents. And Brian Kemp, who is now the governor, was Secretary of State. And I make fun of his accent. I usually don't make fun of accents, but this guy's accent is phony. He used to have a New South Jimmy Carter accent, but then he decided to talk like it's from Dogpatch to fool the goobers. That's the guy, as you saw in the commercial, who says, "I got me a pickup truck to round up illegal aliens myself. I just said that." So that's all phony. Okay, but I sued him and to open up his files, and the judge was so annoyed. The federal judge, basically, she accused him of lying and ordered summary judgment. She said, "There's no trial. Palast has won. Give him his documents and pay his lawyers." I took that. We analyzed it. We found out that we got the names of people like Mrs. Jordan King's cousin, who were removed illegally from the voter rolls. And then Stacey Abrams asked us to bring our experts over and work with them, which we were happy to do. So there's that legal fight, but I'm going to tell you right now, we got to fight ourselves. We can't wait for the outcome of these court cases. What we have to do, the ACLU is also picking up a lot of this material, but we have to act ourselves now through agitation, education, and I told you, check your registration.
Let me ask you about mail-in voting. You talk about the dangers of mail-in voting, which of course is what President Trump does. Of course, President Trump, his family members, his press secretary, they all vote mail-in. And right now in this era of COVID, who is most vulnerable to COVID? Well, it's people of color and poorer communities. And there is a big push that people should be able to mail in and not stand on these extended lines with much fewer polling places. But talk about your concerns, Greg.
Okay, so do understand that I don't agree with Donald Trump, but here's the issue, because remember, he has in case you haven't noticed, he's a psychotic narcissist. So that's a real serious problem. But what he's claiming is that there's massive fraud, that they're mailing in votes from Bolivia and Ukraine. And, he's previously accused black people of voting twice. By the way, that's from, as you'll see in the book, from Birth of a Nation, the film 100 years ago, which was the paean to the Ku Klux Klan, where they showed white actors in blackface sneaking in that extra vote. So accusing black people and others of illegally voting is an old trope but the truth is, and you'll see in the book, Lorraine Minetti, who's the #1 voter fraud expert in America, has said that there are 12 people who've committed voter impersonation fraud, mail-in, by stealing someone's vote and mailing it in and signing for them. 12 people out of several billion votes cast in the past 6 years. That's it. So what Trump calls fraud, we don't worry about. What I'm concerned with is the fraud upon the voters. I just told you that the husband of the head of the ACLU got his ballot too late to cast it. This is our problem right now. So I want you to protect your vote. Check your registration. You ain't getting the vote if it ain't mailed to you. Second, make sure that when you fill that thing out, that you make no mistakes, no smiley faces. In other words, like fill in that bubble, fill in that envelope. A lot of states, you have to put in postage. You have to put the postage on. What they don't tell you, consider this. Think about Wisconsin. Think about Wisconsin, Amy. In order to vote, you have to have a witness signature in the middle of a lockdown. So #1, you have to have a qualified witness signature. You got to make sure that person's qualified. Second, you got to put the stamp on the envelope, but fill it out properly. But if you have to also include a photocopy of your ID if you're a first-time voter. So that's your students, your young people, basically your Democrats. And most people will miss that one, a photocopy of your ID. And are you ready for this, Amy? In Wisconsin, they don't accept the University of Wisconsin student photo ID unless you get the new one, a new special one that allows you to vote from the dean's office, which is closed Amy. So if you somehow get that right ID, but that ain't enough. You not only got to put in the photocopy of the ID, you have to put in a letter. This is Wisconsin. This is the swing state of swing states that's going to pick our president. You're going to have to put in a letter saying you are actively enrolled and in good standing in your school. Now, excuse me, if someone flunked algebra, why do they lose their vote? I'm sorry. But now, and now add to this, when you're mailing in your vote, if you mail in your vote and you have those 2 extra pieces of paper, what have you done? You're now more than 1 ounce. You better put on that second stamp. 100,000 voters in 16 lost their vote for postage due. So what we have to
stamp at all, isn't that like a poll tax? Why should we?
Yeah. Well, very good, counselor. In fact, the ACLU just sued the state of Georgia saying this is a poll tax. Okay, this is poll tax. And by the way, talk about a poll tax. In Alabama, where Doug Jones is fighting for his life for that Senate seat, and in Missouri, which is a swing state for the presidential election, you have to notarize your ballot. You like that one? Notarize it. Or in Alabama, you can have 2 witnesses. Now you're really going to get the virus. So you're trying to avoid the virus. But you talk about a poll tax, to get a notary, to find a notary, and then to pay a notary. This is it's absolutely poll tax. By the way, the courts threw that out. A lower court said you can't have all these cockamamie rules. But the U.S. Supremes only 2 weeks ago said, if the state says you have to notarize your ballot and put wolf's blood on it, they can do that. But they know who they're knocking out.
And we're speaking at the time, by the way, where Ruth Bader Ginsburg has once again been hospitalized. But I want to go to a bigger point, Noam. And as Greg Palast talks about this election, let's talk about what's at stake with this election. If you can talk about President Trump, talk about his admiration of autocrats, talk about fascism and white supremacy. What really will be determined in November?
Those are very important issues, but compared with the real issues, they're small. Another 4 years of Trump, we will very likely reach irreversible tipping points in the heating of the environment. If not that bad, it'll certainly become far harder to deal with the coming catastrophic effects of global warming. And it's not far off. While we're talking about these things, the polar ice sheets are melting, temperature in the Siberia has reached 100 degrees Fahrenheit. None of this is stopping. Trump, alone in the world, apart from some clones of his in smaller countries, alone in the world is dedicated completely to destroying the prospects of human life on Earth within a short-term period. If you're not living under a rock, you have to be aware of this. Maximize the use of fossil fuels, eliminate all regulations that somewhat mitigate the disaster and that protect people from the impact, because it puts more dollars into the pockets of your main constituency. That's Donald Trump. That's only one. He's also tearing to shreds what's left of the arms control regime. Destroyed the INF Treaty, goes back to Reagan, eliminated the Open Skies Treaty, goes back to Eisenhower, now planning a nuclear test to break down the test ban treaty 30 years, and putting frivolous barriers to prevent the enactment of the New START treaty, a couple of months, that's the last of them. Meanwhile, developing new, more destructive weapons, essentially encouraging others to do the same to increase the threat of destruction to Americans. The military industry is euphoric. Huge contracts to build ways to destroy everything, then thinking about further contracts down the road to try to protect us from the comparable weapons that others developing. And military industry doesn't just mean the Lockheed Martin. That's suppliers. It's a large part of the industrial system. So they love it, just like they love the elimination of regulations, which enriches them. But beyond this, Trump and McConnell, who in many ways is the evil genius of this system, he's completely neutralized the Senate. The Senate used to be a deliberative body. It doesn't even exist anymore. Does nothing but pass legislation to enrich the super rich in the corporate system, and to pack the judiciary top to bottom with enough young lawyers from the Federalist Society to ensure that their sadistic policies will be unchallenged for at least a generation, no matter what the public wants. And these are the kinds of things that are at stake. Yes, he likes autocrats. In fact, he's essentially, I mean, some of the things that are going on in Washington are almost indescribable. The inspectors general who were imposed by Congress, conservative Congress, Charles Grassley, to supervise branches of the executive, which to ensure there's not too corruption or malevolence, started looking into Trump's swamp. He purged them. Gone. Went out of his way to humiliate Grassley, senior Republican. Not a peep from the remnants of what used to be a political party. It's now a bunch of cowardly sycophants.
Well, Noam, let me just throw in something from the book that you might find. Well, you've read the book, but there's a chapter, for example, with Billy Koch in it, and everyone knows David and Charles Koch. David's gone, Charles is there, but they were never Trumpers. And Billy Koch, the third billionaire brother in the family, he's he's the head of Oxbow Carbon. He needed the XL pipeline. He backed Trump to the hilt. People talk, look, Trump's, as I say in the book, Trump's not a billionaire. He just plays one on TV. So he needs real billionaires. He's the glove puppet. In the book, I try to give you some of the names of the billionaires with their fingers in the glove. Billy Koch, who very few people pay attention to, he used to get a little bit wasted and call me up when I was at The Guardian, by the way, and would rat on his brothers, detailing, Noam, you'll love this, detailing their felony crimes in the oil patch. I mean, I'm not kidding you, buying off politicians. He was really rolling. But Billy Koch needs the XL pipeline because it's from the XL pipeline that he gets his carbon for Oxbow Carbon, this stuff that's so filthy you can't even burn it legally in America, and he ships it to China where it enters our atmosphere anyway. If we burn the entire tar sands, you're going to raise the entire Earth's temperature by 2.5 degrees. So he needed the XL pipeline, even though Trump was hostile. So he just purchased his way in, and within the first week, Trump authorized the XL pipeline. Because that wasn't because he's right wing or hates the environment. That's because he had to pay back the guy who owns him, the guy that leases him, Billy Koch. And that's the story. It's money.
That's true. Let me add another word about the other Kochs, David Koch. If anybody who remembers back a decade may recall that John McCain, when he ran for president, had a climate change, a mild climate change program. The Senate was moving towards very limited actions to do something about this coming catastrophe. The Koch brothers heard about it, went berserk. David Koch was in charge, launched a juggernaut to ensure that the Republican Party would be pure denialist, wouldn't do anything to prevent the coming total catastrophe. Bought off senators, as you know, not that hard, intimidated others, launched a huge lobbying campaign, AstroTurf, pulled out the stops. Whole Republican Party turned on a dime. Ever since then, there's no global warming.
Noam, let me add something to that, Noam, which is that Senator DeConcini, who represented Arizona, he was investigating David and Charles Koch, and he busted them for what I was on this investigation too with the FBI, a massive theft of oil from Indian reservations, the Osage Indian Reservation. And literally David Koch went to him and said, "You continue this investigation, I will spend whatever it takes to destroy you." And he did. He not only did DeConcini lose his job, he was indicted. I mean, and that was the operation of David Koch, literally. And so when other senators saw DeConcini's body on the political tarmac, they said, "Okay, Mr. Koch, our hands are up. We're coming out. Whatever you want."
Well, there are. Vote stealing is a very major blow against the existence of democracy. But as you just pointed out, the rut is much deeper. There's a lot of work to do to try to save a functioning democracy. We have a guy sitting in the White House now who people sometimes call a fascist. I think that gives him much too much credit. He doesn't know anything about what fascism is. He's a tin pot dictator, the kind of guy you see in a third world neo-colony where there's a coup every 2 years. This is basically what's going on with these things like the executive purges. By now the country's just becoming a laughingstock. And as you know, Europe won't even allow Americans to come there because of the way this maniac has, for his own purposes, killed over 100,000 Americans just to improve his electoral prospects.
We have actually a clip from Wisconsin.
See, the burden is this. I go to register, and I don't know my name is purged. You tell me that now I need, a letter from my house, and I need to, I have to have the identification, but now I need the proof that I live there and all those things, and I have to leave and then come back. Now, the chances of that happening is probably going to be cut very low because of the frustration that they put on people and the burden of having just to go through all these changes just to vote. It should be easy to vote. I mean, I should go to a restaurant and say, "Hey, man, give me a burger and a ballot."
Exactly. That was
Greg.
That was the Reverend Greg Lewis of Milwaukee. And I was with him and with Sequana Taylor. These are people that they said left Milwaukee. You saw them there. Sequana Taylor isn't leaving Milwaukee. They're trying to purge her because she is the supervisor of Milwaukee. But if you look at it, if you look at these voter rolls, I mean, it's a pure Jim Crow list. And it's brilliant the way that they do this. They know who moves, like who moves. Low-income people, renters, students moving couch to couch, room to room. That doesn't mean that you should lose your registration or your vote. But they know this. They understand how to run this Jim Crow operation. And it's true. They're stealing the votes. Noam, you're correct. It's not about voting. You're not stealing votes to steal elections. It's about the money. That's the point. And like in Georgia, for example, I said about how Brian Kemp, where did he come from? He beat, by the way, he beat out the Republican Party's favorite to get the nomination. Where did he come from? And why did he, for example, appoint this woman, Loeffler, as a senator? The answer was, she is on the board of Georgia Power, and Stacey Abrams was trying to block Georgia Power from spending billions of public money to finish a ridiculous nuclear plant. So it's all about maintaining that billion-dollar cash flow to the nuclear industry for Georgia Power, and to ensure it, to pleasure Georgia Power, he appointed this woman Loeffler as senator. And then the other big backer of Brian Kemp is Georgia Pacific. And they have this giant building. What does Georgia Pacific produce? Toilet paper. Why do they need a big building? Because it says Georgia Pacific on the outside, but it's actually Koch Industries owns Georgia Pacific, and that's their big center. And Brian Kemp is a partner, actually, with the Koch brothers, believe it or not, in clear-cutting Georgia pine forests for toilet paper, for pulp. It's the #1 pulp producing state. So it's just follow the money. This vote trickery, vote thievery is a very expensive and sophisticated process. And these guys, Trump doesn't have the brain cells to pull that off. That's why he needs people like Chris Kobach of Kansas and other, dark, spidery brains to come up with his trickery. But so you have these brilliant systems, but it comes down to Greg Lewis, Pastor Lewis, and Saquonna Taylor losing her vote.
So you talk about Jim Crow International, you talk about who's being targeted, but you also say that this is also about a class war. Explain.
Exactly. They, as I said, they go after African Americans, American natives, and Hispanics because these are vulnerable groups. And basically, class war in America, race and class somewhat go together. And so you go after the vulnerable groups. So it's not like they're not the old redneck racists. A guy like Kemp, it's not a question of whether he likes or dislikes black people. He's not standing in front of a schoolhouse door saying segregation now and forever. He just knows that black voters, brown voters are blue voters. And that's what it's about. And he knows that if he has to pleasure the rich, someone has to pay. Someone has to pay Georgia Power for that nuclear plant. Stacey Abrams understood that. That's why she said no. She says, this is going to bankrupt the poor houses, the poor households of Georgia. Won't be able to afford this. But you're going to get the shakedown because so they go after the vulnerable voters, and then you also, when you win the election, you win the voting police. Who's going to bust these guys? Bill Barr? That's the problem. So it is about class. It's about America's resources, the world's resources. And so they go after those who don't have resources, which in America means voters of color and young people.
So as we begin to wrap up, Noam, if you can talk about what gives you hope and the movements on the ground. We've talked about power, who's in control of the White House right now. But this year has seen an unprecedented uprising in this country.
That's amazing. It's actually the biggest social movement in American history. Enormous popular support. Now, popular support is like 2/3 of the population, way beyond what Martin Luther King reached at the period when he was still popular. He lost his popularity when he moved to the North and tried to deal with racism and class issues in the North. But peak of his popularity didn't approach this. And furthermore, there's an enormous solidarity. It's very striking to see the black-white solidarity and the clear focus on policies that are very significant and that can be changed, and even moving on to their institutional roots. All of this has happened within a couple of months. It's pretty phenomenal.
The good thing is that they have to steal the elections, which means that most Americans, if given the real free opportunity to vote, that the good guys win. Okay, we don't have psychotic narcissists, that they're not freely elected. So you have to steal the election in a way that's good to know about the American people, but even more important, they can't steal votes, all the time. The trickery that was done in Wisconsin, changing the ID laws 2 weeks before the election to disenfranchise 50,000 African Americans without driver's license, to disenfranchise 182,000 University of Wisconsin students, yet Scott Walker was thrown out on his keister with all his money, with the Kochs behind him, with all the funky rules changes and the purges. And now you have Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, who brought Greg Palast into Wisconsin to help them fight the purge meisters. So they won in Wisconsin despite everything. You saw you were mentioning Colorado. Yeah, they stole 500,000 votes from Bernie Sanders. He still won the Democratic primary this time. They can't steal all the votes all the time. So if we protect our votes, they steal about 5%. Now that's 7 million votes. But as Obama told my co-writer at Rolling Stone, just have to overcome the steal. So if they steal 7 million, you have to have 9 million more voters. But I'm trying to tell you in the book how to know how they're stealing the vote. You can't stop a pickpocket unless you know that their hand's in your pocket. And the other is the ways to save your vote in the ballot condom. So how Trump stole 2020 is not about it's over with, go home, forget it, it's done, it's a fixed deal. The answer is that I'm telling you what they've done, and I'm telling you how you can undo it so that this time, let's try something radical, Noam. How about the American public choose the president instead of these tricksters?
Not only that, but keep his feet to the fire once you've picked him.
Yeah.
There's constant activism and pressure, no matter who's in there. Okay. That's real politics. Elections are part of politics, but real politics is what goes on the ground all the time, every day, not just every 4 years.
Exactly. And that's why, unfortunately, we can't be going to sleep every 4 years, and then they do the same stuff. They have a new system for going through the voter rolls. 16.7 million people removed this year. And tricks, like we had on Democracy Now!, my Rolling Stone report about interstate cross-check and Chris Kobach of Kansas, where they're removing, there's a chapter in the book, if you remember, Noam, called 358 James Browns. So in Georgia, they removed 358 guys named James Brown because they said they were registered somewhere else. Because believe it or not, they found a James Brown in Detroit and they found a James Brown in Baltimore. It's all the same voter, even though the middle names are different. James Edward Brown is supposed to be the same voter as James Thomas Brown. Okay? This was the trick that they were using. These are the tricks that they're using. We busted that, but now they've got a new one. That was created by Chris Kobach of Kansas, who's a star in the book, and you see me jump him too. If you can't remember his name, just think KKK. But this is what they do every 4 years, and we have the fourth estate, except for Democracy Now!, bless it, Thom Hartmann show and the others, Pacifica Network. But what we call mainstream here goes to sleep for 4 years. And then they go, oh, there's vote suppression. And by the way, that term vote suppression even annoys me. It's the weaseling word. When your car's stolen, do you say, my car's been suppressed? I don't think so. Excuse my sweat. But you don't say my car's been suppressed. We have to take this on all the time, not every 4 years when we go, oh my God, look what they've done to the voter rolls. And don't expect the Democratic Party to save you, please.
Well, Greg, congratulations on the book, and everyone should get a copy. How Trump Stole 2020, with comics by Ted Rall. And very quickly, those comics. Talk a little about Ted Rall's participation in this book.
He's a great investigative reporter in his own right. So he did the cartoon illustration, the 48-page comic book within How Trump Stole 2020, because I want to get it out any way I can. Comics, skywriting. I'm not kidding you when I say we have a techno track coming, and of course films. And whatever way we can get up. But I think that this is a good way to make the point, because they tell you it's a complex story. It isn't. It can be done in a comic book, really. Removing black people from the voter rolls, yeah, there's sophisticated new techniques, but it's a really old game.
So the book, again, How Trump Stole 2020, by Greg Palast, with comics by Ted Rall. And Noam Chomsky, has written so many books, over 100. But one of the latest books is Requiem for the American Dream. Both are published by Seven Stories Press. Thank you so much for spending this time together. Folks, go out and get the books. I'm Amy Goodman, and thanks for joining us.
This whole election is being rigged.
It's rigged.
The election is being rigged.
It's totally rigged.
Oh, thank you, Amy, and thank you, Noam. And I know you guys have got to take off for your rave, But Latasha and I will be staying here for your questions. And so thank you for staying on. And remember, it's Facebook Live. We're going to keep it up so you can have other people come and watch it too. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to, into the chat, I want you to give us your questions. And Latasha and I will answer if we can, unless you've got us completely stumped. And, oh, by the way, Noam, I love the COVID look. You look like Michelangelo's God. And maybe you should be. Maybe you should replace the one we have. Time to get rid of the incumbents, eh? We have with us still, if you missed the intro, Latasha Brown. She is the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. She's also the American Democracy Fellow at Harvard University. And she's in Atlanta right now on the front lines. And she'll be answering our questions with us. And by the way, as Amy said, she has a heck of a voice, and she has a new album coming out with movement songs, and you really ought to hear it. I'm not kidding you. All right, now, and I want to thank. Okay, let me do some thank you, guys. Oh, I want to give you a special offer if you're watching this Facebook thing. For the rest of this week, only, that means through this Saturday night, I still own the rights to my audiobook for another week. So for the next few days, you get a copy of How Trump Stole 2020. You take a little photo of the receipt or send me a screenshot, and I will send you gratis the audiobook. Now, where do you send it to? You go to gregpalast.com, or the easiest way, just send me a little clip or whatever, the snippet, to audiobook at gregpalast.com. No charge. It'll be $20 or more when it hits the retail in a few weeks. So free audiobook at gregpalast.com. Just pick up a copy of How Trump Stole 2020. Pick up 3 or 4 copies because you're going to need one for your cousin in Iowa who thinks that Donald Trump actually won the election, okay? Now, if you have questions for Latasha while you're writing them out, and we've already gotten some great ones, I want to thank some of the sponsors of this event, starting with Reverend Jesse Jackson and Rainbow Push Coalition, Project Censored, National Lawyers Guild, Nation of Change, BuzzFlash, The Progressive Magazine. We don't have the Regressive Magazine on here, just The Progressive. ScheerPost, that's Bob Scheer's great new website. The Thom Hartmann Program, bless you, Thom Hartmann. The Santita Jackson Show. Igniting Change with the nation's top voting rights attorney, Barbara Arnwine. Don't miss that. Flashpoints with Dennis Bernstein. Politics Done Right with Egberto Willies. Between the Lines with Scott Harris. Staying Home with Josh Fox. We'd all like to stay home with Josh Fox, but hey. Progressive Democrats of America. Americans for Democratic Action, as opposed to those Democrats who are for inaction, but that could change. Creating Conversations. Bookstore. The Tiny Bookstore. Left Bank Books. And of course, Busboys and Poets. I'm glad that both the Busboys and the Poets Bookstore are behind us. So thank you again, Amy. I'll catch you. I know you got to get up early. And Noam, you too. So with Latasha Brown, we'll take your questions. And if you have a particular one for Latasha Brown, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter, why don't you shoot those up right now? In the meantime, I already have a couple questions that have come in. First of all, what are the Democrats doing? Well, I don't know. That's why I have a chapter in the book called The Silence of the Democratic Lambs. I don't know. They didn't call me up and tell me. This is one of the issues. You don't rely on the Democratic Party to save your vote. It's not a complaint. It's just you can't pass it off. Okay? They're not going to take care of your vote for you. I'm not going to go in why they may or why they may not, because, I'd have to find out why. I'm not a Democrat. I am nonpartisan. For me to find out what the Democrats think, I have to crawl into that tiny space. Latasha, why do you think that, or at least some of the Democratic Party is not acting on the issue of the wipeout of voters of color off the voter rolls?
So let me say this. It's interesting. We have to think about what we're talking about. What we're really talking about is we're really talking about power. And so the Republicans have been just so egregious in how they have undermined and dismantle the democracy in this country, that what it does is, it makes us look at the Democrats in a way that it seems like they're champions. And there are some that have been champions, but let's be honest, they have also been complicit, as you raise in your book, and many of them continue to be complicit in this process. I even thinking about just most recently in Kentucky. When you look in the Kentucky election, people who may or may not know, just a couple of weeks ago in the Kentucky election, they shut down the majority of the polling sites in one of the counties in particular, which was Jefferson County, which is where Louisville sits, and 50% of the African American population for the state live in that county. So, but what did they do on the election? What did a Democratic governor and a Republican Secretary of State come up with together? They actually closed all of the polling sites in that space with the exception of one. There was one polling site for 612,000 voters in a county that the vast majority of African Americans live in.
Lexington.
I raised that there is some complicity in that process, and I think what you said, I think that's why we got to think about a couple of things. The first thing is, one, when we're talking about democracy, that should be citizens-led, not just in terms of dependent on the political parties, because at the end of the day, we're talking about power. And parties will do whatever the parties need to do to concentrate power for themselves. But ultimately, really when we're talking about voting, that should be a nonpartisan issue. With having access to the ballot, all Americans, I would fight as feverish and as hard as for my Republican counterpart to not have access to the ballot or not be able to vote. That would disturb me the same way that it disturbs when I am impacted. Because I believe that every single citizen should have agency within a democracy to be able to cast their vote. And so I think what we've got to, a couple of things. One, we've got to take this issue outside of just the partisanship. That on one hand, we need to hold and have champions right within the party context, and we certainly need to hold the Democratic Party accountable since the majority of their constituents are actually impacted by voter suppression efforts. But then three, we need a pro-democracy movement. What we have not seen at mass scale in this country, and I am hoping that we see this that come out of the uprising with the Black Lives Matter uprising. We have not seen a pro-democracy movement like we see it in Chile right now. Those who have been following, or if people are familiar with what's happening in Chile, who came out of a dictatorship for a number of years, had vicious murders of folks who were actually activists and social justice folks under Pinochet. That part of what we've seen in recent years is the people uprose and said, no, we're not going to continue to live under the thumb of the state. And this fall, here it is, Chile, that is supposed to be a developing country in South America, is so far advanced in terms of where they are, the people are, in demanding and holding people accountable for democracy, that this fall, they're actually having an election. They are completely restructuring their constitution. But here we are in America. I'm raising this because there's uprisings happening all over the world. And so part of what we know is what makes change and what creates this country itself did not come out of a political party, that the foundation of this country itself came out of protest. The Boston Tea Party was a protest. And so, and in that context, there were people who said, hell no, we're not going to continue to pay taxes to a government, to a nation that does not look out for our interests. And so we will create our own nation. The bottom line is we have to literally, citizens and people and the folks that are listening to this, that we've got to step into the leadership and recognize that who leads us are not necessarily those people that we put in office. It is representative leadership. They're leading us to the extent that they should be going and enacting our vision and what we want to see and what we sent them there for. That's the kind of government that we are supposed to have, that is supposed to be guaranteed by the Constitution. But what has happened is that we've all gotten caught up in this quagmire around partisan politics instead of really talking about making sure that the people have the power, not necessarily just being a vehicle as a proxy to help political parties get power.
Thank you. Look, that was Latasha Brown, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. We're having a little technical difficulty. Stay with us. We're going to be answering your questions. This is Greg Palast, and we are having our special Facebook Live launch of the book, How Trump Stole 2020. And remember, the book, the most important part of the book is how to steal it back. It's not a done deal. But here's a done deal, or a deal that could be done in the next couple days. If you get anyone if you go and buy How Trump Stole 2020 from your favorite bookstore or any of the other outlets, just send me a receipt. Just, take with a photo of your phone or do a screenshot, something like that, and send it to me. Send it to audiobook@gregpalast.com. That's audiobook@gregpalast.com. Got to do this by Saturday midnight because that's the only time I have control of the audiobook. Audiobook@gregpalast.com, and you'll get a free copy of the audiobook. We'll shoot that out to you. So, and right now, let me answer a couple of the other questions. Well, someone asked, why don't I get on Rachel Maddow? You'll have to ask Rachel. Please do. Let's start asking why. One of the things is, now, don't say I've been cut off of MSNBC. It's not true. I was on with Joy Reid many times. I've been on with Al Sharpton. The question I have always is, where are the pale-face hosts? And this is one of the problems we have here. The issue of vote suppression, as Noam, as you were saying, Noam, it's really class war by other means. However, class in America is determined to a great extent by race. And when you bring up the issue of race, I hate to say it, my pale colleagues in journalism are very, very uncomfortable. Very uncomfortable. Like I said, I just got a call from a reporter who covered the election in Florida 20 years ago from the New York Times. They are now interested in the story I wrote 20 years ago for Democracy Now! And BBC television on the wipeout of African-American voters in Florida. 20 years later, they're interested. So all I can tell you is maybe in 20 years, we'll get the news about the theft of the 2020 election. So you're going to have to take responsibility yourself. You're going to be the media. You're going to go to gregpalast.com. If you haven't, most of you have already subscribed to my free newsletter. It comes out about once a week or so, with our investigative reports, and whether I do it for Rolling Stone or Democracy Now!, I do also put it on the Greg Palast website. Now, we also got a question from Christina from Arizona. Christina, you are asking, if you are an African-American voter in Arizona and somehow you survive the purge in that state, which is pretty brutal, how do we still make sure your vote gets counted? I'm going to give an answer first, then I'm going to ask Latasha if she wants to step in. But the first thing is, and I say it, how many times can I tell you? You can't mail in your ballot if it's not mailed to you. Now, I know that seems like a very simple concept, but the Democratic Party is missing. A lot of people are missing it. You have to be registered. So the number one way to get your ballot is first, make sure you are registered. If they've pulled you off the voter rolls, put your name back on it. By the way, as I've said, I looked up my registration, and it said, in California, Greg Palast, no such voter. I re-registered. I saved my vote. Save your vote. Number two, and the ballot condom. Here's How Trump Stole 2020 at the very back. I want you all to take, take a photo when you get the book of this Ted and Greg's new improved ballot condom to save your vote. Okay, so this is for safe voting. And one of the things that we tell you is ask for your ballot way in advance, like 2 months in advance. If you don't get it, you better call your county board of elections. Now, this is what the advice I'm giving in Arizona is the advice we give everywhere. And then when you fill out that mail-in ballot, you better make sure that you have the correct postage, that you don't put a smiley face instead of fill in the bubble, no check marks, no red pens, and make sure you don't leave anything blank and you don't put in an extra mark. If you screw up the ballot, I'm sorry, you are going to have to go into your county board of elections and get a new ballot. That's how it works. You have to use the ballot that they enclose inside. There's all these things that they can shaft you out of your vote on, and they do. As I've said in the book, in 2016 we had 3.3 million absentee ballots never counted. Over half of those were from people who never got their ballot on time or got it too late. 3.3 million, that was in 2016. What's it going to be this year? especially with Agent Orange sabotaging the post office brick by brick. And so we've had some bad news on that front, but we are responsible for our own votes right now. We have got to fight this out. So that's just the beginning of what can be done. Latasha, do you have a comment on how to save your vote in Arizona?
Yeah, I think you said it. I think there's a couple of things. I think one, we can't take it for granted that we have to accept that it's not just individual, but that democracy is under attack. And so what that means is a number of things. We have to be more diligent. Unfortunately, we have to be more diligent than ever to make sure that we are, as you raised, Greg, that we have to do often and early and get engaged in the process. So please, you can actually go to vote.org just to make sure that to make sure that you're registered, make sure that that you're in the system. If you're not, because we're finding people that think that they're registered, they're asking for their ballot, they're not even registered, right? You have to request the ballot early on.
Let me emphasize something on that, Latasha. You just heard Latasha, that's Latasha Brown, the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. Now listen, she mentioned an organization, vote.org. That group has every registration roll in America. Go there and you can find out whether you're registered. And if you're not, click through and go to your Secretary of State or Board of Elections, County Board of Elections, and make sure you're registered and then re-registered if you're not. And you're going to check this again, by the way, in September, and then ask for your absentee ballot. Because if you ask for your absentee ballot and you ain't registered, you ain't getting no ballot. It's not rocket science here. And we had Phil Griffin. Good math, Phil. You estimated that the steal is about 7 million votes to overcome. And you're damn accurate. I guess maybe you were cheating. You were reading from the book. But I have a whole breakdown. Hillary Clinton was defeated by a manipulation, basically blocking 7.8 million votes and voters. About 2 million people were blocked from voting, and about 5.8 million votes weren't counted. You got to overcome that. Okay, so, and this year, with the mail-in balloting, the loss of ballots, the disqualification of ballots will be worse. I said it earlier to Amy, which is that according to the U.S. Civil Rights Commission, if you're black, the chance your vote, once you've actually mailed it in, the chance your vote will be disqualified on technical grounds. They didn't like your signature. Something like that. You had an extra mark on the ballot. Chance you will lose your vote if you're black is 900% higher than if you're white. That's the U.S. federal government's own study. So we're talking about Jim Crow in the mailbox. Let's be very, very careful. So we're going to have to overwhelm the steal. And it's not whether you're for or against Trump. It's a question of whether you think that the voters ought to choose the president this year instead of the Jim Crow trickery that we've had.
Here's a couple of questions. If you could read that, these bottom two.
Okay.
Jim Pike.
Whoa. Mr. Pike. Joan Pike. Pirkle. Sorry, Joan Pirkle. This is, by the way, that's the voice of Carrie Harrison, who is safely, literally wearing an American flag over his American flag mask while he's helping me out here. Of the 16 Joan Pirkle writes, Joan Pirkle Smith, which organizations that are working on voter theft are the most effective ones to donate to? Would I be cheating if I said the Greg Palast Investigative Fund? Just make out the... Actually, we do have... our work is funded by a not-for-profit foundation, nonpartisan not-for-profit, the Palast Investigative Fund, which is part of the Sustainable Markets Foundation of New York. And so, yeah, so there's places for us you can donate, and then you get a signed book. But there's also some great organizations out there. And indeed, I was asked, has anyone talked to the ACLU of Georgia? Yes, we have. Believe me, they've contacted us. I can't go into details. It wouldn't be right because there's strategy going on here. And also I'm working on a story as a journalist. But ACLU of Georgia has been right there on the front lines. So there's one group. There's so many great groups. And obviously the Rainbow Push Coalition has been in this forever. The Reverend Jackson and his family and the Rainbow Push Coalition. has not always been, lately, they've not been the frontline headline organization. That also indicates that they're actually down in the streets doing the work. There's fantastic organizations all over. And of course, there's Black Voters Matter, right? You take donations, Latasha?
Absolutely.
Oh, wait. Let me get you on air. Latasha will take your donations. And believe me,
I will.
Go ahead.
Yes, I will take your donations, but let me let people know kind of our motto. And Greg, I am going to have to leave in a couple of minutes.
That's fine.
But there are two pieces. So one, our model is we actually help build grassroots groups on the ground. And so we, at any moment, are actually working and reinvesting in about 150 to 200 Black-led grassroots groups in states that are most vulnerable as it relates to voter suppression. So when you're supporting our work, you're actually helping to build the local infrastructure. You can find out more about our work if you go to www.blackvotersmatterfund.org. We have a way that you can actually contribute to our C3 organization, which is our nonpartisan nonprofit organization, or we have a C4. And with our C4, we're able to actually support issues and candidates and do work separate and independent of the, but really be able to put people in office and take folks out of office that are not aligned with our values and are working to suppress our vote.
Okay. Thank you very much, Latasha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, coming to us from Atlanta. And she's a fellow at Harvard University, but the important thing is that she's on the ground right now fighting the fight in Georgia, which, by the way, people say, oh, well, that's a Republican state. There's 2 Senate seats up for grabs. And as of this year, according to the census, Georgia is now a white minority state. So how come it's red? The answer is vote thief in chief Brian Kemp. Okay, so I'm just going to say goodbye to Latasha and say hello to Brian for me, for Governor Brian. Now.
Yeah, we'll say hello for him. We got a message for him. So anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for just the work that you're doing with this wonderful book, putting the information, and people need to know that the biggest threat at this point has been voter suppression. That when they can't win it, and what it does say is that the majority of Americans really are supportive of democracy. The majority of the Americans are actually on our side, not theirs, and they know it, and that's why they're suppressing the vote. So thank you for all the work you're doing, Greg. Talk to you soon.
Yes, we will. We have a lot of work to do, and we'll be meeting in Georgia probably electronically. Okay, now let me add once again, thank you, and I want to thank Latasha for saying the book is wonderful. Noam says it's scary. I think it's wonderful and scary, and Josh Fox says it's effing hilarious. I don't want to use his language on Facebook. You know how Zuckerberg feels about that. So, but I do want to remind you that if you get the book by Saturday and send me a receipt, that is to audiobook@gregpalast.com, audiobook@gregpalast.com, you get the audiobook for free. And I want you to play it for people in your carpool. You know, the guy from Dubuque who thinks that Trump, that Agent Orange, actually won the election in 2016. Okay, so be very careful. And I know people are going to sleep. Oh, Biden's so far ahead in the polls. He's approximately where Hillary Clinton was against Trump at this time in 2016. So the polls don't count. The vote suppression at the polls is what's going to count here. So so what I'd like you to do also, now a few things. I want you to get the book. I want you to photocopy any chapters you want. If you have an organizational newsletter, I'm giving you authority right now. Forget the copyright. I'm not challenging anyone's use of this book. Any chapter you want to send out to post on your websites, do that. Let people know about the book. It's a weapon. And in case you're wondering, no, I don't make a penny. I mean, this shirt, see the tears in the shirt's torn, okay? I got to tell you, I don't make a dime off the book. Every penny of it, every penny of the proceeds goes to the Palast Investigative Fund, not-for-profit, nonpartisan foundation. If you want to add in a few shekels, hey, I won't say no. And you go to gregpalast.com and get all kinds of goodies like the book signed and my DVD, like the DVD, The Best Democracy Money Can Buy, which was starring Besides, it was starring Chris Kobach of Kansas, our vote thief in chief, and Brian Kemp's in there, and all these good guys. But there's also Rosario Dawson, Willie Nelson, Ed Asner, Ice-T, Richard Belzer, and a few other characters who make an appearance in, well, it's a documentary, but Santa Claus is in there as well. You'll see it, you'll understand it. But so go to gregpalast.com, download The Best Democracy Money Can Buy. And if you buy this book now, you'll get the audio book. So that's enough of that commercial. Now I want to say, how are people seeing themselves committing to this work? Well, how does the book, for those who've been listening to what we're doing, how would you suggest? I mean, you got questions. I'm not the ultimate authority on everything. I want to hear what you have to say about how we save the vote. So do we have any good questions there, Kerry?
We do. We have from Philip Griffin. Of the 16 million purged so far, are you estimating 7 million are wrongly purged so far? How many have been wrongly purged so far?
Yeah, that's about a correct number. We're going literally, the Palast Investigative Fund is literally going through each of these purge lists as our funding and time permits, and as we have lawyers helping us out. Remember, I had to sue Brian Kemp in federal court to get his list. They're not handing them over like, oh, here, Palast, expose the truth. So we get them out of their hands. So we haven't analyzed every list, but the lists we have analyzed are 74% wrong. Now, I think that because we focused on the states with real sticky-fingered vote thieves like Georgia, so the number is 74%, but I actually think it's probably about 1/3 of the 17 million voters have been wrongly removed. I'd say you're right, about 7 million of those voters. That's a lot of voters, and that could be you. Again, it was me, and I re-registered. It was, as we saw from the beginning of the film, Martin Luther King's 92-year-old cousin voting in the same place for 50 years. Get out, scram. It's Sequana Taylor, who was told you can't vote because you don't live in Milwaukee. She's Milwaukee County Supervisor, but she is African American, so she was guilty of voting while black. Yeah, so I think this also, we have programs that we're, even though we defeated the Chris Kobach interstate cross-check system, we really did, and which is an important story. By defeating one of these methods, we have saved literally 1 million votes. Still, people were wiped out and may not know that they were wiped out earlier by Mr. Kobach. If your name is David Kim, if your name is Park, if your name is Ho, the Asian American community is really under threat here. 1 in 8 Asian Americans were Asian American voters were on his hit list. So, yeah, you're about right, 6-7 million illegally purged voters, especially voters of color.
Next question comes from Terry Cramish Weeks. What about election fraud with the voting machines in Florida?
Yeah, okay. Our biggest problem in Florida with election machines, by the way, is that they break down. Now, but it's not random. It's not random. You have to understand that the best way to steal votes by machine or by computer is just to not turn on the computer, not give people the passwords, the information, the courts. I mean, we literally had in Georgia, I'm not kidding you, in this past primary, when I was talking to the folks down there in the ACLU, we had people, there were no cords to connect the brand new voting machines. There were no passwords given out. And while the last time they changed machines in Georgia, they had 600 technicians running around the state helping people set them up. This time they cut it by 2/3. So what happens is the machines simply don't turn on, they don't work, or they go zap and all the votes are lost. They say, well, how do they know whose votes are lost? If you are in Atlanta, you know whose vote is lost. You know whose color of vote is lost. It's black, brown, Asian American, in other words, bluish color votes. So yeah, I'm very concerned about voting machines in throughout the country, mainly breaking down. In Florida, you have paper ballots, but you scan, and the scanners, as we saw in Detroit, the scanners break down. Where do they break down? African American communities. Yeah. Am I worried? Yeah. So be very very careful, and especially when you mail in that vote, because they're going to rip it out of the ballot. And if they decide that your signature is okay and you don't have any extra marks and it's not folded wrong, then they'll stick it in the scanner. And if there's a wrong mark, kicks out, you lost your vote. Careful.
Next comes from Michael Rains. Greg, you're one of my favorite active heroes. Okay. I'd like to repeat Dave Miller's question on the message board. Why can't Democrats get purged voter rolls and go see if those people still live in their voting districts?
Why can't Democrats do the work that the Palast Investigative Fund is doing? I don't know. Yeah, it would be... Hey, guys, I'd save a lot of money and I can retire, okay? So why don't the Democrats do this? Beats me. Did you know that that when I spoke to some Democratic voting officials, they didn't even know how to do it. In fact, that's why I should say in the state of Wisconsin, the Democratic officials there have actually asked the Palast Fund to go through their voter rolls for them because they don't have the technical ability to do it. And they're just learning about these things, and they're stunned and shocked. Some of them really care. As in Wisconsin, you really do have some progressive Democratic leaders who are very concerned and are fighting the purge, and we're helping. But most the Democratic politicians, I remember when I went to go see Terry McAuliffe when I was a BBC reporter and he was chairman of the Democratic Party. And I said, you know what, they're removing black people from the voter rolls in Florida, calling them felons, and they're not. And he said, well, we don't worry about that because we're going to have lawyers out at the precincts on Election Day. Terry, let me explain something. Democrats think everything can be solved with a lawyer. But once you have a lawyer in the voting station on Election Day, it's too late. The voters lost their right to vote. And so all the lawyer can do is sit there, nod their heads, and say, tisk, tisk, tisk. The other problem we run into is that most people are going to be voting by mail. So unless you have a lawyer licking your stamp for you, you're going to be in trouble, Terry. So the Democratic Party is simply not hip to this issue, and we can have endless discussions about why. As Noam brought out after reading my book twice, that the Democrats have their hands dirty too.
Here's a question. That was excellent. Why is Stacy Abrams supporting vote by mail?
Well, why Stacy? Because she doesn't want people to die. How about that? If you look in my book, and people have misunderstood my special chapter called Mail-in Madness, and I'm telling you about the dangers of mail-in voting, but for gosh sakes, I'm not saying don't mail in your vote. I'm not saying stand in line and get a virus and bring it back home and kill your grandma. No, I don't think that's a good idea. So the point of the Mail-in Madness chapter of How Trump Stole 2020 is to warn you about the massive disqualification of mail-in ballots, the fact that 1 in 10 people who ask for them never get them. Okay, that's important. So we have to overcome that problem. And so, I'm happy that Stacey Abrams is saying vote by mail, but she knows the dangers. I think if you're paying attention earlier, she herself almost lost her vote because in Georgia, you have to mail back your vote in the envelope they give you. You have to lick that. So in the Georgia humidity, her inside envelope for her own ballot was sealed. And thousands of voters lost their vote in Georgia because they had sealed envelopes. Anyone who opened that sealed envelope and replaced it with their own envelope lost their vote. Stacey Abrams knew she had to go risk the virus, stand in line, get a new ballot. It's murder to vote by mail, but it's deadly not to.
Here's one from Peter O'Callahan. How do we get these states to encourage new voters to vote? Increase the rolls, not purge them.
How do we get the states that want to? Remember, there's a lot of states that just don't want you to vote. And that, at Ohio, also the state legislatures of Michigan and Wisconsin, so they don't want you to vote. They're doing everything they can to discourage you from voting. Now, there are states who want you to vote, and what can they do? Number one, send everyone a mail-in ballot. I'm in California where we're mail opt-out state. In other words, you get a ballot, everyone in California gets a ballot, unless you literally tell the state, don't send it to me. Okay? Now, what's the problem with that? So there's some extra ballots out there. Bolivians can't cast ballots. They're all marked with special codes. There's no chance of the fantasy of fraud that Agent Orange is trying to sell us. So how can states do this? Send every voter a ballot. Not just every voter a request for a mail-in ballot, because it looks like junk mail and people miss it. Let's send everyone a ballot. Second, no purges in an election year. It's actually against federal law, unless there's a, quote, emergency. Well, what's the emergency? I think the emergency for the purges that are continuing throughout this nation, the emergency is that Agent Orange is in trouble in the polls. There should be completely barred. Federal law should be followed. There should be no more purges between now and Election Day. And there's a lot of reforms we need, including on the mail-in ballot, simple stuff, postage paid. None of this crazy stuff like Alabama and Missouri, where you actually have to have your ballot notarized. And there should be no excuse, obviously. So there's lots of things we can do. And to get people who've moved into a state to vote. Ironically, I have a whole chapter beating up the Pew Charitable Trust. But they understand, they actually are trying to do the right thing. They're sending states lists of people who've moved into their state, and they're saying, send them registration forms. So they're trying to do the right thing. Unfortunately, the Republican states are saying, oh, you gave us a list of movers? We're going to wipe them off the voter rolls. Instead of adding people, they're wiping them off. So you have to understand, there's so many active players trying to block new registrants. The other thing is that in some states, they need your registration verified before you're added to the voter rolls. This stuff has got to stop. But again, states should be making every effort to tell people not only to register, but check your registration. That's going to make a huge difference. And if I were a Democrat or anyone who cares about the right to vote, Republican, green, purple, whatever, we should all be shouting, check your registration, skywrite it, put it on your bumper sticker, put it on your birthday cards, check your registration.
Here's one from Dan Tino. Speaking of Democrats with dirty hands, can you talk about how the Democrats stole the California primary from Bernie in 2016?
No, I will not tell you that, because I'm going to make you buy the book. Sorry. How Trump Stole 2020 has a chapter called California Reman. It is Noam Chomsky's favorite chapter. Thanks, Noam. He keeps telling me about that, reminding me. And it is in detail how the Democrats stole the Democratic establishment stole the primary in 16 and in 20. So the chapter California Reman. And look, it's about power. Who's going to control California and its massive resources and its $40 billion surplus, which is the virus is quickly sucking up. But the main thing is, and it's so crazy, it's hard to imagine. Alex Padilla, the Democratic Secretary of State, sent out 3.7 million ballots without the presidential candidates on them. 3.7 million ballots out of the presidential candidates that went to the independent voters who have a right to vote in the Democratic Party. Colorado sent the independent voters Republican and Democratic ballots and said, choose which one you want. Mail it in. Not in California. If you didn't specifically ask for that special type of California Democratic crossover ballot, and you had to know the word crossover, you don't get it. Crossover ballot, you got a ballot without presidential candidates. According to the California poll, 80% of the people of the 3.7 million who got that ballot didn't know that they had the right to send it back in and get the right ballot with Bernie and Biden and Bloomberg on it.
Here's a similar question, right along the same unfortunate derailed train of democracy. Joe Fitzgerald writes, what can you tell us about ballot access in New York State? In my assembly district, our 3-term Democratic incumbent is being denied a place on the ballot because of some technicality. So there's currently only one person on the ballot, a first-time Republican doorman who is so far running unopposed.
Okay, this is the game that they play. Now you're getting to a new level of purge. And they're not only purging voters, they're purging the candidates. See, what happens is they go in, and I was in New York, and I personally witnessed this happening when I was working in New York,
which is the party hacks go in and they start taking the to be on a ballot, you have to have so many signatures, and they start questioning the signatures and knocking off the signatures. This is the new way to win an election. You not only purge the voters, you purge the candidates. I mean, look, understand there's no bottom to these people. There's no bottom. You think that they've hit the low point, and you ain't seen nothing yet.
Here's one from Stacy DePolo. I so love you, Greg. And
Thank
she
you.
means that platonically because your wife will slap her silly.
Oh, my wife's cool.
Her question is, how can we activate the amazing network of Bernie activists on Slack that we used to win the California primary and other key states to become the agile volunteer force capable of pulling off the complex vote-by-mail education and execution of an early voting campaign we obviously need? I'm no Biden fan, but I'm committed to doing what it takes to get Agent Orange out and taking the Senate away from the GOP.
Okay, now number one, I'm not partisan, but I think that the voters ought to pick the president and ought to pick the Senate. So I'm there with you on that one. And you mentioned, how do we activate the Bernie voters? And it's interesting that you say the Bernie voters. We should be activating every voter, including people who like Trump but think that democracy is not such a bad thing, okay? So how do we activate people to educate, to protect your mail-in vote? That's very important. But I agree that Bernie's followers, and I've talked to Sanders, and he's one of the few people, he's the only candidate that would sit down with Jesse Jackson and me and go through the details of vote suppression. I mean, he's right on it in the middle of that fight. And so I know that his organization, people like Josh Fox, Our Revolution, are very concerned. So what do? Yes, they should be taking this on. Not only that you should vote, and it's not whether you vote for Biden or anyone, it's that how to vote and not lose your ballot. Now, go to gregpalast.com, sign up, because we are going to have special little videos how to not lose your mail-in ballot, okay? So it's going to tell you how it's not just lick and pick or pick and lick. You don't pick a president, lick a stamp, and it goes out. We're going to show you how to do it on videos. And I want to thank a very, very wonderful film star for funding those films that we'll be making. We'll let you know. We'll let you in on that one soon enough. But the important thing is, yes, we're going to have videos, and we want to get them out. So I'm going to deputize you. You say you love me platonically. Well, if love means anything, you will get people to go to gregpalast.com and watch the videos when we get them out there and take a look. And in fact, I tell you something. Even if you don't buy the book, for those who do, take the chapter on mail-in voting and send that out. Take the ballot condom on how to protect your vote and send that out. I'm not worried that I'm going to lose a book sale. I am worried that I'm going to lose a democracy.
What a great way to end.
Are we ending already?
Well, you want to keep
we have
going?
to say goodbye.
All right.
Okay, now let me go back. I
got one more question.
Okay, one more question. One more.
Greg, why aren't we seeing a class action lawsuit or conspiracy charges against these secretaries of state at all?
I did sue Brian Kemp, and I won. The judge said, basically said in so many words, Brian Kemp's lying. And so I opened his files. Now, why aren't there class action suits to put people on? There will be. Watch this space. There will be. But don't expect the courts to save your vote. But believe me, there will be. We are making the Palace Investigative Fund findings. You got to, how Trump stole 2020 has a comic book and everything else. But what's not attached here are the lists of hundreds of thousands of names per state, that we are turning over to activist groups. And by the way, I'll turn them over to Republican groups if they say, we're going to use this to restore people's votes. It's not a partisan issue. I keep saying that. Unfortunately, it's a racial issue in America. So just so you know, we are talking with some of the more important voting rights activists who have asked us for this material. And believe me, we actually think we can save 1 million votes. But I need your help. I literally need your help to do it. You're going to have to get the word out about this book and about the dangers the Jim Crow in the mailbox. So please, I'm asking you, and again, you get the book by Saturday night, send me some receipt or something to audiobook@gregpalast.com. You get a free audiobook, pass that around. And I want to again thank Noam, you're the best. Amy, I'll be seeing, we're doing, Amy and I have agreed to, we're going to be doing a report from Wisconsin, the theft there. That's the swing state of swing states. So watch for Greg Palast from Wisconsin. I've already been there, but I may have to just go there virtually. So by the way, I need deputies on the ground everywhere. If you're in Milwaukee, if you're in Columbus, Ohio, if you're in Raleigh, North Carolina, I need you to be sending me the information. Okay? It's very, very important. And also, we need to talk to people who are getting shafted out of their votes so they can go on camera and tell their stories. So we need you. We can't do this without citizen journalists everywhere. And I count on people to send me the information that they've gotten. If you happen to have a document marked confidential from inside one of these states, I get a lot of inside stuff. I will protect your identity with my life and my hat. And I can't tell you which is more valuable to me. Okay, so I will protect you. And thank you very much. And thank Carrie Harrison, who has the Corona Alert daily. Catch him on your local radio station. And thank the whole team. And once again, Latasha Brown, co-founder of Black Voters Matter, Noam Chomsky, and Amy Goodman for Democracy Now!, Not Democracy Later. I thank you all, and I thank you all and all our co-sponsors for joining in today. We've got work to do. See you at gregpalast.com. Thanks.